override the religious freedoms of doctors, to compel doctors to be part of the abortion process, referring on to another doctor if they won't do the procedure themselves. Now, I hold the view, and as a non-religious person, a secular person, I've become particularly strong in this debate, and it's not just about civilisational issues. I hold the very strong and I believe truthful view that every time government makes someone do something against their religious faith, against their moral code, we move one step closer to a police state. I think there must be a limit on the capacity of government to force people to do things against their religion. In a free, open and tolerant society, the importance of religious faith should be respected. We can't move closer to a police state by wiping the faith, the beliefs, the religion of a significant number of individuals and making them do things that they regard to be morally wrong. This was one of my chief objections to the gay marriage legislation that Turnbull brought before the federal parliament, because it made no provision for protecting the bakers, the dressmakers who didn't feel like they wanted to be part of a gay marriage but could be prosecuted under New South Wales laws, under discrimination laws for not participating. So it's wrong to make people to do things that they regard to be morally wrong. And we must stand up for that principle, whether religious or non-religious background, always stand up for the freedom of individuals to do the things they regard to be right according to their legitimate religious code. Now, unfortunately, this abortion bill is basically saying if you're a doctor of Christian faith, a doctor of Islamic faith, a doctor of Hindu faith, a doctor of any religious faith, you need to comply with the bill. You need to refer on the patient to someone else against your beliefs, against your religious values, and if you don't, you can be rubbed out under the medical certification boards. You can be rubbed out effectively as a doctor. That's a shameful thing, and it's one of the amendments we'll be putting forward. It's a sign of the arrogance of the cross-party cabal that they rejected the amendment of Joe McGirr, the member for Wagga Wagga, who is a doctor, an independent member for Wagga, who's a doctor, put forward an amendment to the abortion bill to say that there should be the capacity for conscientious objection without any penalty. And we'll try and resurrect that amendment in the upper house and hopefully have a bit more success. But I'm sure Fred and others will have amendments in other areas. I mean, the feedback I've had publicly is a general public aversion to the concept of late-term abortion other than in life-saving circumstances. I think Gladys Berejiklian here has lost her marbles in that if you start with an extremely left-wing bill, start with a left-wing bill that mimics the Queensland and Victorian Labor legislation, well, obviously the Greens and the Labor left will be cheering about it, and your Conservative base inside the Liberal Party will be disillusioned. And in fact, a majority of the Liberal Party in the lower house voted against it. So why would a Liberal Premier start with a proposition that the Greens and the Labor left cheer for and her own party base is against? So she would have been much better advised to start with something similar to the Northern Territory law. You hear this thing around the country, it's all decriminalised. That's not technically true. In the Northern Territory, under 24 weeks, the abortion practices have been decriminalised, but over 24 weeks of the pregnancy, they're still illegal. So I think the public here in New South Wales would regard that as far more acceptable than what they're putting forward, because the problem with late-term abortions is obvious. It's a dreadful thing to think about. It can be barbaric in practice if it's subject to these gender selection practices, then that's clearly unacceptable. And you run the danger in the medical field. I remember back in the federal parliament, Philip Nitschke running around on the euthanasia issue. I'm not saying this directly about him because I don't want to get in legal trouble, but in the medical area, you can't assume every medico is sound and reliable. You can get a Dr. Death character who wants to do these things for the sake of it. Now, to have provisions like the ones they started with there under Greenwich, whereby the doctor just got to consult, ring someone up, a fellow medico, and then get approval to do the late-term abortion, is obviously a hopelessly inadequate safeguard. And you run the risk of medicos who've lost their bearings doing the wrong thing. So, these are all things that require thorough examination. This shouldn't have been rushed in and an attempt to rush it through the Parliament. It's not just the substance of the legislation that's faulty, it's also the process, and it's on that subject that I'd wrap up my remarks before we do questions, because we've got to understand the process by which it got to this stage, because the plan by the cross-party cabal initially was to get it through the Legislative Assembly in 1 week and then come to the Legislative Council last week and have it all wrapped up in 2 weeks. Now, this is how arrogant they were. The fix was in. This hasn't sort of just spontaneously come from the ground. This was a proposal that's been worked on over many, many months, and it's supported by people who cross all the conventional party political lines. You know, all of us in this room would have grown up and got used to what we call the two-party system, where it's coalition versus Labor. But on issues like this, the two-party system has been blurred and diluted to the point where the sponsors of this bill represent this cross-party cabal that has progressive National Party people. Who would have thought you'd ever have left-wing National Party people, but they're part of it, left-wing Liberal Party people, the Labor ones, the Greens, the usual suspects that you expect, the independent Greenwich. They all got together initially over the gay marriage campaign, and Greenwich was a sponsor of that. They used some of the facilities of this building for fundraising, they mobilised, they got together this cross-party cabal, and they then thought, well, if we could get through the gay marriage laws, they'd move on to abortion, then euthanasia would be next, and then abolition of the confessional seal, and on it goes. So they've got, you know, a full agenda. They think they've got the numbers, and they're thinking that they can ram these things through in an arrogant way, not spoken about before the election, the public not having heard about it, and get it through 2 chambers of Parliament in a fortnight. So these people are really the power that they exercise has gone to their head. And I would urge everyone in this room to talk about the way in which New South Wales Parliament now is not run under a two-party system. It's run by this cross-party cabal, and out some of these characters for what they are. When I came here after the March election and heard that the National Party had a Khan in its ranks, Khan, that's his surname, Khan, I thought, oh, he must be from the Genghis division of the family. But it turns out he's from the Sadiq Khan side of the family, you know, the Mayor of London. This bloke Khan is the shop steward for all these left-wing social issues. He goes around door to door in the upper house trying to get support. And in the National Party, amazingly, he's been incredibly influential, because in the lower house, only 2 of the 13 National Party members voted against the final abortion bill. And it's said in our upper house that perhaps it'll be none out of 6. So you've got the possibility in the National Party, which was a socially conservative party for decades, that only 2 out of 19 of their representatives in Macquarie Street would be voting against this faulty law. So it's quite remarkable. One of the things we talk about in the changes, the madness that's around in politics, is the march through institutions. Well, one of the institutions they've marched through is the National Party, where you might as well just stamp it green. You know, you vote National, you get green. That's what's happening. So Fred and I and others are engaged in the public awareness. People should be aware of this. They've got to know what they're voting for. They've got to know what's gone wrong. And we've got to talk more about the true nature of this cross-party cabal and those who support it. Gladys Berejiklian has said, well, this is a conscience vote and people can vote the way they want. Well, no, they can't vote unless the government allocates the time in the Parliament. And it's a decision of the government, originally the decision of the government to try and rush this through. I mean, Alex Greenwich there, 1 vote in the lower house, has supposedly somehow got the power to have the government allocate to his bill 50 hours of debating time. 25 in the lower house, 25 in the upper house, all this time and consideration. He's got 1 vote in the place. You know, even I've got more than that. I've got 2 in One Nation. So, you know, Greenwich has got the rails run, and for a lower house independent, it's phenomenal that the government decided his legislation should get priority over Fred's private members' bills. He's one on religious freedom, he's one on Zoe's law. My private members' bill to keep the lights on by going down the path of nuclear power and also lifting the ban on uranium mining in New South Wales, and a whole host of other meritorious private members' bills that should get consideration. We're shuffled back. We're off to 6-month-long committees. Our matters won't be finalised until next year. But if you're Alex Greenwich, a green left, gay left man from the inner city under the Berejiklian regime, no, forget all the other business of the parliament, drop it all and give the allocation of 50 hours of debating time to this proposition that's been backed by the cross-party cabal. So this is a new type of politics. It's disrespectful to the public, to proper process, to transparency at election time, to the due processes and role of the Legislative Council as a house of review. So we're fighting not just the substance of this legislation, but also the appalling process by which it's come forward to dominate the considerations of this building in the middle of 2019. So we're fighting on many fronts, whether it's for our religious freedom legislation, the culture wars that are so important, this particular bill, the processes, everything's in flux. Everything is changing in 95% of cases for the bad. We're fighting on the side of what's right in due process and substance, and I welcome all the support that you provide to people like me and Fred. We'll continue the fight, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks for listening.